Hey guys, this is Danny, and welcome to the third episode of my audio series on ADHD. In this one, I'm going to be talking about ADHD and dating, relationships, both being with someone with ADHD and dating while being someone with ADHD. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a timeline from the start to the end of a relationship when someone has ADHD. If you Google it, you'll find out that this is a very common problem in a lot of ADHD relationships. If anyone has seen my video on ADHD and relationships, you'll know that I myself have had a very stereotypically ADHD breakup and relationship. A lot of this actually came from experience. I'd been diagnosed pretty recently when I had the relationship, and I hadn't any of the coping mechanisms, nor did I have any of the knowledge about all of this. And after it ended, when I looked it up, I realized, oh shit, all of these problems that I had were actually very common in relationships when someone has ADHD. Now, before I even get started, I'm going to give an advice. Just because you're bored in the relationship doesn't mean you're bored off the relationship. It's quite common for people with ADHD to be bored. We experience boredom or understimulation all the time. I experienced this problem myself. I was bored and I thought, I shouldn't be bored right now. I'm in a relationship. However, that's not the case, as you can imagine. We don't tend to have the best introspective skills, especially if you haven't learned any coping mechanisms. And it's quite common to think you're bored off the relationship, while the truth is you're just bored and also in a relationship. So a person with ADHD gets into a relationship, and the first couple of months is great. A lot of the time, what happens is that we end up hyper-focusing on the other person, and we're kind, we're generous, we're thoughtful. We live for them, and the first couple of months go great. Now, unfortunately, what goes up has to come down, and hyper-focus always ends. And that's when the problem starts. Because the partner is used to a certain level of affection and attention, and when it goes down, they start thinking, wait, this person doesn't care about me as much anymore. Now, of course, this isn't the case. We still care about them just as much, but it's just the hyper-focus has ended, and it's harder to pay attention, essentially. It's not an easy thing to say, but it is what it is. Now, at the same time, the person with ADHD can think, oh wait, I'm not as focused on this person anymore. Maybe I'm not into them as much. And another thing is that the first couple of months, the honeymoon period, things are new, things are interesting, things are novel. And people with ADHD, we love novelty. It's fun. But when that dwindles, our attention starts to drift. And there's also the more day-to-day stuff. Our memories are bad, so we forget things, broken promises. The partner starts feeling like they're more of a parent than a partner. Because we have a tendency to live chaotic lives, the other person might feel like they're picking up a lot of slack, and they start feeling resentful. And add that to the fact that we have communication difficulties and the relationship is in major trouble. And the partner might give the person with ADHD an ultimatum. They might say, I'm having difficulties dealing with all this. You have to change or I can't be with you anymore. But a lot of the times you can't do anything and things end. And yeah, that was actually just my experience. That was what happened with me. It wasn't fun. Now, one of the worst things for me is that she told me that during the end, or around the end, there would be times where she would be crying in bed beside me. And the thing is, I never knew. That's how much I was trying to distract myself. I was essentially on my phone after the first couple of months, I was on my phone for the rest of the time. And I never noticed. I was quite bad back then, but yeah, I still feel guilty to this day. People with ADHD tend to have a higher rate of divorce than the average rate for this exact same reason. It sucks. However, you can do something about it. If you're the person with ADHD, what you should do is you take your partner, sit them down, and then tell them about the difficulties you're facing. Tell them that the fact that you forget isn't because you don't care about them. It's because you have memory difficulties. Now, this might seem obvious, but I've often seen it being said. If you cared about me, you would remember. That's not how that works. Now, of course, our memories aren't dictated by how much we care for the person. However, keep in mind that it's very hard for someone who hasn't faced these difficulties to understand our perspective. So sit them down and tell them, just because I forget, it doesn't mean I don't care about you. And another common complaint is they don't seem to listen. Now, this is because people with ADHD have difficulty paying attention, naturally. So a lot of the times when things are being said, even when we hear them, we don't really register it. So that's a problem that has to be talked about as well. Because again, if a person isn't going through these issues or hasn't experienced it themselves, they won't really know about it. So, on communication, people with ADHD have difficulty communicating. We have difficulty with social conventions, social norms. We have difficulty reading faces, understanding nuance, sarcasm a lot of the times. And this doesn't help with interpersonal connections. Communication is vital in a relationship. Naturally, I don't have to say this. So you have to make sure to make time for each other. I would say at least once a week, minimum. Just make time, an hour, 2 hours to just sit down and just talk. And no, this is required because this doesn't come naturally to people with ADHD, to think to do this. If one of you have said something that hurt the other, talk about it, explain it, speak it, make it obvious. People with ADHD can't really understand nuance. So if you're upset, or for whatever reason that the other person might have said, talk about it. Say it directly. And one of the best advice I've ever seen in this regard was by a lady who was going out with a guy with ASD, autism spectrum disorder, and she said that their relationship was very clear because any time that she was hurt for whatever reason, she would say it directly. She would not expect him or wait for him to just understand because she understood that he has difficulties with it. So she would just be straightforward, tell him, and things were clear, and she was happy. And if you're the person with ADHD, if you feel insecure or having doubts for whatever reason, talk to them. Explain to them how you're feeling. They are your friend and they are your partner. Feelings of RSD, feelings of rejection that you might be feeling for whatever reason, tell them and they will alleviate your doubts. They will alleviate your misunderstandings. And as I said, because people with ADHD tend to live chaotically, the partner might start picking up slack. And this might continue until the partner might feel more like a parent. This is actually a very common complaint. Hell, my ex actually said that to me. It tends to devolve into a very unhealthy, codependent parent-child dynamic, where the partner is just picking up too much slack for the person with ADHD. So a clear line has to be communicated and decided. The partner has to think and understand and make sure that they're not picking up too much slack. And the person with ADHD has to remember to not depend on them too much. It starts out slow, but after a while it could be that the partner is doing most of the chores, most of the cooking, and it's very easy to fall into that habit. It creeps on you and you don't even realize it. So make sure to make a clear, distinct line. This is what needs to be done. Make a fucking chore wheel, Decide on who does what. And I think that is the best option. Figure out, communicate, align jobs, roles, and just stick to them. If you're the partner, remember, you just helping them out can quickly devolve into you just doing things for them. And lastly, for the partners, always remember, you don't have to sacrifice your mental and physical health for their sake. You come first, and you can choose to simply leave. This might sound harsh, but I'm just going to say it. A lot of people with ADHD just aren't in a place where they're going to be improving, and you are just not appreciated. I know this is harsh, but unfortunately, it's true. You can be fully supportive of your partner with ADHD, and they just might not listen or really accept any help. That is a case that is very common. People just don't see how they're hurting others. And I guess you could say that, it's unintentional, it's not really their fault, but you don't have to go through all that. You don't have to suffer for their sake. You can try, of course. I'm not saying if something goes wrong, leave them immediately. However, after a couple of months, after a couple of years, you don't have to put yourself through all that stress if your partner is just not listening. Don't sacrifice your mental health for others. Don't put yourself in a worse position for someone who doesn't seem to care. And I think that's it for this episode. I don't know how long it's been, but I can see that I've been recording for nearly 40 minutes now. I think this would probably be the longest episode yet. I hope you guys found it useful, and thanks for listening.